Thank you so much for being here today. I would like to give a special thank you to Lifespan of the Greater Rochester area and the Steuben County DSS. My name is Eric, and I'm the Aging Well Planner for the Office for the Aging. Today, we have Patrick Roth, who is a CPA and attorney who limits his practice to estate planning and elder law. He graduated from the University of Buffalo Law School in 1999 and is the owner of Roth Elder Law, located in Painted Post, New York. Let's please give a warm welcome to Patrick Roth.
Thank you, Eric. So as mentioned, my name is Patrick Roth, and I am an attorney in Painted Post, New York. And today I'm going to be talking about the topic of elder law. Now, I do want to start, you'll see I put a slide up that is a little bit of a disclaimer. The information that we're going to talk about today is really just general information. I think you'll get a lot out of it, but it's not a substitute that if you think you know someone who's going through this, if you believe, whether it's a family member, whether it's yourself, this does not replace you sitting down talking to someone on your specific area. I know I have found over the years, sometimes one little fact can completely change the advice. And the other thing, especially when it comes to this topic, it would be impossible in the time that we have today for this recording in order to talk about everything that we could. So, and I also want to let everyone know that Steuben County Office of the Aging, if you are looking for additional resources, they do have additional resources on this information. They are a great help in this area. So with that, I am just going to dive right in. And so as I mentioned today, I'm going to be talking about elder abuse, which is really defined as any form of mistreatment that results in either harm, it could be physical, it could be emotional, or loss, like a financial loss to an older person. Typically, most of the studies that I see refer to that as someone who is 60 or older. Sometimes you'll see like 65 or older, but that is the definition of elder abuse. So today I'm going to be covering all 5 of these areas. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of these, about physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse or emotional abuse, neglect, and financial abuse. And what I'm going to be talking about and what I'm going to cover in this workshop is I'm going to talk about signs of each one, because that's how you can notice that and hopefully help someone who may be going through something like this or who has gone through something like this. So before I turn and get into the 5 areas, I just want to toss out some of the facts because I don't think people realize how big of a problem this really is. And right now we have a global population 60 or older that from 900 million people in the year 2015, that is going to explode. That the number of people age 60 or older in 2050 is going to be approximately 2 billion people. So it's going to more than double in this estimated time period. And in the United States alone, they estimate that each and every year there are approximately 5 million elder abuse cases. Now, you'll see a lot of times I talk about estimated because you will see that not all of these cases are reported. So that's why these are estimated. And again, this is in the US, but they estimate that each year the financial abuse costs approximately $36.5 billion per year in the United States. So in New York State specifically, we are the 3rd largest state with people 60 or older. California and Florida are the other 2. But right now we are the 3rd largest state of people 60 or older. And in general, in New York, the reported elder abuse cases come around the holidays, specifically between Thanksgiving and Christmas and shortly thereafter, that time frame. Roughly only 1 in 24 cases, so less than 5% of the cases are reported in New York State. And for financial abuse cases, it's even less, 1 in 44, so just over 2%. And that's why you'll see like a lot of times these numbers are estimates because so many of them are not reported for a variety of reasons, which we're going to touch on a little bit later. But in New York State alone, they estimate that anywhere from $352 million to $1.5 billion annually is lost because of elder abuse on the financial side. So that is New York State specifically. And as I mentioned, it is a huge problem, as you can see by the statistics. With respect to the victims, so the people that are being abused, more than half of them are 80 or older. So the older people are, generally the more that it is happening to them. Nearly 2/3 of the victims are women, and 60% have either dementia or show some kind of sign of confusion. And 40% of all the cases, also the victim is showing signs of depression, and that could be a result of what has happened. So, for the perpetrators, often they are known or related to the victim, and I actually have a slide that's coming up where we're going to talk about that, of who it is in order. But generally, often they're known to the victim, and quite honestly, that's one of the reasons why they don't get reported. And we have just estimated numbers. But of those that are reported, roughly 52% of the abusers are men, 48% are women. So really there is close to half and half. But the thing that surprised me is finding out that 1/3 of the people doing the abuse are seniors themselves. So this is people over the age of 60 doing it to other people who are over the age of 60. But 2/3 of the perpetrators are adult children or spouses. So it's the family members that are the most common perpetrators of this. So that slide that I mentioned, so this goes in order of who is doing the elder abuse to others. So the most common perpetrators are family members, and by this I mean blood relatives, either a spouse, a child, or another blood relative is doing this to another family member. Caregivers is the second most frequent category. So someone who's coming in and starting to provide care to them, they may be the ones that are causing the abuse. Friends or neighbors tend to be next. So as you can see, the first three categories are all people that are either related or known to them, and oftentimes very well known to them. So those are the most common perpetrators, those three categories. Next comes service providers. So this could be someone who, the plumber who's coming in to fix something, the repairman, something like that. But it's service providers are the next category. New best friends or sweethearts. Someone, maybe they're starting to date someone new. Maybe they found someone new or a new friend that they're starting to hang out with. And the reality is the lowest category is strangers and con artists. So that is actually the least frequent that do this, although there are a lot of people out there trying to do it with scams and things like that, but it happens more often with people that they know. So those are the perpetrators. Some of the general risk factors, so this goes across all of the areas, but these are risk factors that, if we have more of these risk factors, the person is more likely to be a target or a victim of it. So isolation in general, the person is not getting out, or they're very isolated for whatever reason. Maybe there's a dependence on others, that could be just because of old age, it could be because of a disability, or it could be because of an accident, they had a slip and fall, something like that. Cognitive decline, so when they start to have a mental or physical decline, either, and a lot of times those two things lead to a dependence on others. And then alcoholism or substance abuse, so drug abuse. And this could be both on the victim side or on the abuser side, and often we actually see it on both. So these are some general risk factors that someone may be more likely to be a victim of elder abuse. Some other mental illness can be a risk factor as well. Health problems, so physical health problems. Disruptive behavior, so past experiences, that if they were subject to, some kind of abuse before, even before they were an elder, those past experiences and that disruptive behavior could be an indicator of another general risk factor. Some kind of traumatic event, loss of a loved one, things of that nature. Someone who is under high levels of stress and the lack of social support, that kind of goes back to the first, at least in my mind, of being more isolated. but not having a good social support system, not getting out, not hanging out with friends, not talking to friends and family, things like that. That is another general risk factor. So those are some of the common risk factors that go across all areas. We're going to talk a little bit more about each one specifically, starting with physical abuse. So physical elder abuse is defined as the use of physical force that causes pain or injury to someone who is 60 or older. So that is the physical abuse. Some of the signs of physical abuse, this tends to be one of the easiest forms of abuse to spot because it may be present, like you may physically be able to see it. So this includes bruises or welts that, someone is being hit or someone pushed into something, things of that nature. So they have bruises or physical signs of that nature, either on their head or on their body. Broken bones or tooth loss. So, someone gets pushed in and falls, hits a table, they lose a tooth, broken bones, things of that nature. That could be another sign of the physical abuse. Or restraint marks. So marks on the wrists, ankles, the neck area. So those kind of restraint marks could be a sign of physical abuse. So, so as I mentioned, these tend to be some of the easiest to spot because there is a physical appearance that you can see. Sexual abuse, this is almost a subcategory of the physical abuse, but this is non-consensual sexual contact of any kind. With this type, it's not as readily visible just because of the areas that it covers as compared to other physical abuse. But some things that people can look for: torn or bloodied underwear, so undergarments, things of that nature. Bruises, so bruises around the chest or breasts or genital area, excuse me. They could be a sign that there's something going on. Unexplained genital infections. And then someone who, may be a victim of this could be having panic attacks because of it, or showing like social or emotional withdrawal that, if they become abused, they're going to withdraw either emotionally, socially, or suicide attempts we've also seen could be signs that there was sexual abuse that has happened. So these are some of the signs that it may have happened, especially if someone is not willing to verbalize it. These may be things to look for related to the sexual abuse. Emotional abuse. So emotional abuse is the infliction of mental or emotional pain through either verbal or nonverbal acts. Either the verbal acts, like verbally berating someone. Nonverbal acts could be motion, like pretending you're going to hit somebody but not actually following through and having them hit them. Those could be signs, but that is a form of emotional abuse. So some signs of the emotional abuse: isolation, hesitation to speak openly with others. So especially if this was someone who is also very outgoing, where maybe they've clammed up and things like that, where before they used to be very outgoing. Showing especially unusual fear, agitation, anxiety, or helplessness could be a sign of emotional abuse. Changes in sleep patterns, appetite, or behavior, or withdrawal from normal activities. So, for example, for those of you that may know my family, several years ago, about 9 years ago from when this was recorded, my dad had an aneurysm and a stroke. He ended up needing 24-hour care. My mother, along with some paid help, but my mother was the primary caregiver. So one time, and we actually had, this lasted for 8 years, over 8 years before my dad passed away. Help in this area can be hard to find, but there was one case specifically where my mother had hired this woman. She came in, she was taking care of my dad for a while, and eventually she gave her notice. She found another job and was going somewhere. And so she'd given her notice. My mom interviewed, hired someone else, started training her. And soon after, we believe that the woman who had originally quit called and said she wanted her job back, but we had already filled the position. My mother told her that. Well, this woman started to threaten her, saying, I know where you live, I know where you shop. She, said, my boyfriend, can come. And my mother was actually afraid of physical harm from this woman. So we actually had to go so far as to get a restraining order put out. Luckily, nothing ever came of it. But I remember for a long time, my mom, she didn't want to go to the store on her own, and she had to change some of her patterns or behavior because of it. And luckily, as I mentioned, nothing came of it there. But it was just something on top of everything else that they really don't need to go to. So, even though there was no physical component that showed up with that, the emotional abuse to my mom was just, it was not good. So some other signs of emotional abuse: low self-esteem. And again, this could be, you could see this as a change, maybe someone who had, good, healthy self-esteem after an event of some kind of emotional abuse, maybe now has lower self-esteem. The inability to make decisions that, same thing, maybe they're able to make decisions before, but all of a sudden now they seem to rely on someone else to make those kind of decisions. Depression or frequent arguments. The weird thing with my mom's case, this was not a caregiver that she had any problems with before while she was actually giving the care. But it only happened after the fact. So, but as I said, it wasn't just a one-time thing. It got so bad we had to get a restraining order. But frequent arguments that seen between a caregiver and an older adult could be a sign of the emotional abuse going on. So, neglect. So neglect is either refusing to fulfill any part of duties of an older person or just failing to carry out those duties. For example, some signs of neglect could be poor personal hygiene. So maybe someone had been hired to bathe them, to dress them, to help with things like that, and that's not being done. So, we start seeing poor personal hygiene, malnutrition, dehydration. So for those of you that do not know, dehydration will oftentimes show up as confusion. So the person may be very confused because they're dehydrated. Unsafe, unsanitary living conditions could be another sign. Untreated physical problems, someone falls, sprains their ankle or something, and instead of going to the doctor to have it checked, it thinks, they don't go and have it checked on, and it gets worse, things of that nature. Inappropriate clothing for the weather. So maybe they're not being dressed properly for going out in the winter, or in the middle of summer, they're bundling up when they really don't need to be. But inappropriate clothing for the weather could be a sign of neglect as well. So on neglect, self-neglect is kind of a category. So this is where the person themselves, who an older person, is not able to take care of themselves, and maybe sometimes they don't even realize it. But this is the most commonly reported type, because this is not so much, hey, a neighbor, a friend, or someone doing it, so it tends to get reported when someone sees it. It is more common among people who are 85 or older. So the older you are, the more chance that it may happen. And people with self-neglect, usually you also see some kind of dementia, or a mental capacity issue starting, chronic illness, or again, the substance abuse, like the alcohol, drug abuse, things of that nature. So with self-neglect, usually this is going to be reported by someone else because they are seeing the behavior, and whether it's a spouse, a parent, or a neighbor, and that's why it tends to be reported more. But a lot of times, because unfortunately, one of the things here is, as people get older, they may not want to report that they need help, because they may be worried that, well, if I tell this to someone, maybe they're going to remove me from my home. I don't want to be moved from my home, things like that. So this is an area, especially with neglect, and that's why self-neglect sometimes is likely to happen, because they're afraid that if they say something, if they say they need help, that they can't do things themselves, that someone is going to remove them from their home. And rarely is that actually true. So we hope people will go get help, because they really don't want to take you out of your home. Financial abuse. So this is the one I tend to see the most, and probably just because of the type of law that we do, and that gets reported. So we tend to see more financial abuse. So this is either an action or a process where someone tries to illegally or improperly use an older person's resources. So financial abuse, some of the things we've seen, check cashing. So they're writing and cashing checks Maybe they're forging a signature. That may go together with the check cashing, but the forging a signature is not limited to just checks. It could be on legal documents or other things of that nature. I saw one time a situation where there was a brother and sister who lived on the same street. They didn't get along with each other at all. So the brother ended up going into the hospital, and apparently while he was in the hospital, there was a power of attorney that got signed that was to the sister, who he really didn't get along with. And after he got out of the hospital, he found out about the power of attorney because apparently the sister had signed a deed signing his house over to her, and he had to undo that. So it's not just with checks, but just forging signatures could happen. Misusing money. So we see this a lot, unfortunately, and this one is probably really rarely reported, but I see all the time where, especially we may have a family member as a caretaker, but I've seen instances where, that caretaker all of a sudden has a new vehicle and they claim it's because they're helping mom or dad, they need this new vehicle to do this. But when we see the vehicle, it's like one of these gigantic trucks that mom or dad couldn't even climb into to begin with. So we see misuse of money that way, stealing money. I know this was a problem with caregivers with my mom over the 8 years, that, it would happen periodically with different caregivers. And the weird thing was, it was never like huge sums at first. It was, my mom just noticing like, oh, I thought I had more money than that. And, but she would tell me, she would think, oh, well, I have several grandchildren, they're around, I give them money. Maybe I just gave them more than I realized. But when my sister set up cameras in the house at different times, ended up finding that no, when my mom would go back to take care of my dad and the caregiver would stay out in the room, they would dip into my mom's purse. They wouldn't take all the money, they'd just take part of it. So, kind of the slowly stealing the money. So deception. So again, with the financial abuse, there could be some kind of deception going on. Along with that, the scams, and we have a slide coming up in a minute about the scams. So, but all of these are forms of financial abuse. Unfortunately, when it comes to scams, it tends to be the elderly are targeted more and are victims more, which is why they are listed here as a form of elder abuse. But some of the signs, some of the things we tend to look for could be changes in spending pattern, unusual spending. So we once had a client that saw this because they had a caregiver and they started to trust the caregiver. They started to send the caregiver to the store. And what happened was, and it took a while before they found out, but apparently that caregiver, when they went to the store, they would add a gift card, and it started out very small, $10, $15 and $20, and it grew. But eventually one of the kids was looking at mom's credit card bill because all the kids lived out of town, but reviewing mom's credit card bill and thinking, geez, this is unusually high. And when they really dug into it, they found that, by that time that they were putting, $50 to $100 every time they went to the store on a gift card and pocketing it. So we see changes or unusual spending habits, things like that have changed. That could be a sign of the abuse. Unusual withdrawals or transfers. We once had a case where we saw a woman who was trained by her new boyfriend to go into the bank by herself and withdraw money every Monday from the account. And again, same thing, this started smaller. So it was a while before it was caught by the daughter who lived across the country. But, it didn't raise flags at first because the woman was going in by herself. She started taking out the cash, but it wasn't huge sums at first, and it started to grow over time as the boyfriend felt more comfortable. But it was quite a while before it was actually found out. Inappropriate purchases, we kind of talked about that. Purchasing a new vehicle when maybe one is not really needed. We've seen subscriptions to magazines. We've seen like four-wheelers purchase, you name it, that all kinds of inappropriate purchases. Missed appointments or uncharacteristic non-payment of bills. So especially if we had someone who was always really good about being on time, being at their appointments, or paying their bills, and all of a sudden, they're not showing up for their appointments. or bills are not getting paid, or you see, the next one, utilities being turned off. So these could be signs that someone has kind of put themselves in the middle of that, and these things are getting pushed off because the money is being siphoned off somewhere else. So, and then fraudulent signatures on financial documents. Again, they could be the checks like we talked about earlier, or it could be other financial documents as well. Transfers of securities into someone else's accounts, the deed that we talked about, things like that. So on the financial abuse, one of the things, best friends are new sweethearts. I kind of use this as an example. Several years ago, we had a situation. So we live in a very rural area. It's a great area, I think, to live in and bring up a family. But these things happen here too. We once saw a situation where it was estimated by the family that this gentleman started dating this much younger woman, actually, for a period of about 1.5 years. And after the fact, it was found out that they estimated somewhere around $1 million to $1.5 million was actually siphoned off during that period. So it happens around here. It happens on a very large scale. We are not immune to it just because we live in a small area. So, so you have to be careful of that. Some other signs: abrupt changes to wills, trusts, or powers of attorney. And this is honestly, this is where using a professional rather than trying to do it yourself can give some protection in this area. Because when someone comes into our office and wants to change their will, typically the attorney is going to be trained to ask why. And don't get me wrong, we are not, I could care less where you plan to leave your estate, who you leave it to, but we're looking for the explanations of why, one, to make sure there's capacity and things there, but it could also be because someone is being unduly influenced by someone else. So abrupt or unexplained changes to those types of documents, wills, trust, powers of attorney, that could be a sign that there's some influence out there that is leading to financial abuse. So lack of knowledge or anxiety about finances, especially when you have someone that maybe they were always the one who took care of the bills and things like that. Someone comes in and starts taking that stuff over. So now they no longer know how much they have. And because of that, they start to worry, do I have enough to live on? Are my bills being paid? So, just that lack of knowledge or anxiety about finances, and in and of itself, it may not be, because sometimes we have clients that just, they don't know about that. Maybe the other spouse always took care of it. But sometimes it could be a sign that someone is stepping in and doing something they really shouldn't be doing. So, so those changes, as I said, and a lot of these, so when we tend to see elder abuse, at least through our office, we usually see more than one of these things going on at a time. So we may be seeing the financial abuses that we're talking about right now, but that may be coupled with emotional abuse, being threatened and things of that nature. So, so lack of knowledge, anxiety about finances, or a change in that could certainly be a sign of financial abuse. Unexplained disappearance of money or valuables, and unfortunately we hear lots of stories about this, that people losing valuables or things, even if it's temporary, into a nursing home for rehabilitation, things like that. There could be showing an unusual degree of fear or submissiveness. We've seen times people come into the office, they say they want something done, and then anytime you ask a question, they're looking over to the person that brought them in. So a lot of times attorneys are going to kick other people out of the room. So again, it's just a protection for the person who's there. Unnecessary goods, services, other subscriptions, magazines, things like that. All those could be signs of financial abuse going on. Scams. So again, this is not limited to the elderly, but again, the elderly do tend to be scammed more often than a lot of other age groups. And we see things like phone scams, people calling on the phone, trying to get money out. One thing we tend to see with the phone scams, they're usually high pressure. They're, hey, they need money and they need it, right away, and lock something in. Kind of related to that, the grandparent scams, where maybe they get a phone call the person on the other end of the phone doesn't identify themselves. They may not use a name. Grandma, grandpa, they're like, oh, is that you, Timmy, or is that you, Patrick? You know, and they volunteer a name and they're like, yes, that's me. Please don't tell my parents, but I'm in trouble. I got a ticket. I need you. You know, is there any way that you can loan me money? I need you to send it here. You know, again, please don't tell my parents, but we need to do it today. Otherwise, I'm going to be, you know, put in jail overnight, something like that. Those are grandparent scams, often referred to as grandparent scams. And one of the things you have to be very careful of nowadays, it may not just be a call. Sometimes people will be targeted, and there is so much information on, you know, Facebook and some of these other social platforms that maybe they do know the names of the family, or they know someone is out of town. So the scammers are getting very savvy to these things. And because there's a lot of information that is just known publicly that didn't used to be. Excuse me. Lottery scams. So we see this email, we see this by phone, but usually it's someone has won something, but you need to pay either an administrative fee or they want you to pay the taxes. So they may say, you know, you win this, but you have to pay the taxes, or we need to make sure, or we need a routing number to deposit into your account. So you gotta be really careful of lotto scams. When it comes to these, you know, one easy way, at least typically a US-based lottery, you are not required to prove or provide any of that up front. You do not have to prove you can pay taxes. You do not have to pay any kind of administrative fee. Yes, if you win a lottery, you may have to pay taxes, but that's going to be on the tail end. That's going to be after the fact, not up front. Home improvement scams. So we tend to see this in a variety of different ways. You know, we've sometimes seen, you know, there may be a contractor, they're working down the street, and, you know, as they're working there, they see, you know, an older lady, man, or maybe a couple, and they go up to them and, hey, you know, we're finishing a job down the street. We notice your roof is in really bad shape. We're actually ahead of schedule. We can give you a discount, but, you know, if you want us to do it, we're going to need a deposit. We need to go and buy the materials, but we'll give you a great deal because we're here and we're scheduled out and our next job doesn't start until next week. So I've also seen scams where we've had people go in, like we had one time where an electrician had gone in, they're doing renovations to a house. They had a general contractor and then they brought in an electrician. The electrician was updating wiring in the area of the house that was being updated, and they ended up cutting the power to certain parts of the house that were somehow connected. And they said, oh, you know, now that we're in here, there's additional work that needs to be done. The power is off to parts of the house. So, you know, the person is almost kind of held hostage of that. When, you know, talking to others, we found out they would have known that ahead of time. There's no way that the electrician would not have known that ahead of time. So tax scams, this tends to be the IRS. We see this on two different sides. It's not actually the IRS, excuse me, but someone claiming to be the IRS. And as I mentioned, we kind of see this on two sides. We see either a scare tactic way that, hey, there was a mistake, you owe more taxes, you have a certain period of time to do it. You know, give us the account information or whatever. The other we see is the hopeful side that they're playing on. Hey, we redid the tax return, or there's an error on your tax return. It's actually in your favor. You're due a larger refund. We just need to confirm some information with you to be able to send that refund on to you. Either of those are scams. The IRS never initiates contact by phone. And very few things actually do that are not scams initiate anything by phone. So the IRS's website themselves will tell, they will never initiate contact through the phone with you. Don't give out any of your information to someone who calls and claims for that. So phony charities or investment frauds, you know, again, even in a small area like this, we unfortunately see some of this stuff. So what can you do? So I want to put this statistic up because again, I know I mentioned at the beginning of some of the statistics, but someone who has been subject to elder abuse has a 300 times higher or 300%, excuse me, 3 times higher risk of death than someone who has not been subject to elder abuse. So that's why this information is so important, and things that you can do to help prevent it, either yourself or friends or family, things like that. So one, for protecting yourself, avoid isolation, stay social. And I know this was difficult. We don't have statistics yet, at least not that I've seen, what has happened through COVID. So a lot of these statistics that you saw were pre-COVID. We think those numbers are going to go up an even larger amount when these statistics get released. And I know because of COVID, it was hard to avoid the isolation, but staying social, whether it's phone contact, whether it's in person, obviously, you have to decide what's best for you, but keep in touch. Keep in touch with your friends, your family, try to get out there and stay engaged with other people. If you are going to make changes with financial, legal, things like that, if you have someone you can trust, talk to them first. Or again, if you're working with a professional, discuss with them, tell them why, bounce it off of them, make sure that it's sound. And again, like someone like me, I don't really care what you're planning to do with your estate. I don't care where it goes. I will tell you what I think, but it's your money. It can go wherever you want. But having that discussion, can start to help find, hey, is there some kind of undue influence there in the background that should be looked at? So keeping your legal and financial documents in a safe place. So make sure that they're safeguarded. Same with your personal information and passwords. I saw an article last year that said, on average, most people have, more than 100 accounts and passwords. And a lot of times, unfortunately, they use the same password for a lot of different things. So, and you hear on the news all the time of these companies being breached and passwords and things like that. So make sure you're keeping that stuff safeguarded. There are programs you can use that will come up with very extensive passwords. These programs will also keep track, hey, if any of the sites that you're on had a breach, they will notify you of it so you can change the password, much quicker, things like that. So buy and use a shredder. So if you had a lot of clients that buy a shredder but don't always use it, make sure you're using it, use it on your mail. Anything that has any kind of personal information at all, you should be shredding it instead of just throwing it away. Protecting others. So probably one of the biggest things for caregivers, if you are acting as a caregiver as others, try not to get overwhelmed. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to, let others know. And there can be a lot of help. There are programs out there that if there's financial difficulties, someone may be eligible to get financial help with caregivers. But there are a lot of programs out there that people may just not be aware of. When it comes to others, watch for changes in their mood or appearances. As I mentioned, did someone withdraw? Were they always very outgoing, but all of a sudden they're not? Are they showing fear or something else? Those could be signs that there was some kind of event that happened. The appearance, was this someone who was always very good about their appearance, but all of a sudden now they're showing up and, they're not as neat and tidy as they used to be, or maybe their clothing, it really is not appropriate for whatever season it is, things like that. Watch for changes like that, talk to them, stay involved. Make sure you're staying involved and try to keep the family member, friend, whoever it happens to be, try and keep them active, keep them social and getting out there. The information we went over today, share it with others. And if you believe there is elder abuse going on, report it. I've got a slide, maybe the next one, but coming up soon, that's going to have some valuable phone numbers and things like that. But if you are suspicious, if you think it has happened, especially if you see multiple items that we covered today, it could be a sign of elder abuse. So on the legal side, making sure whether yourself or the others having the proper legal documents in place are going to help this. And it also creates a record. Hey, are there significant changes? Why is that going on? But again, powers of attorney. Power of attorney is to appoint someone to sign checks, pay bills, manage financial and general things in case someone is not able to. Healthcare proxy, at least in New York State, that is appointing someone to make medical decisions if you're not able to. Having a will that directs where your property is going to go when you pass away. Trust. So a trust a lot of times could be almost like a cross between a power of attorney and a will. It's probably going to have language of here's how I want things managed if I'm disabled and can't do it myself, as well as where you want things to go when you pass away. And the neat thing about trusts are we can build some protections into trust that we can't do with just powers of attorney and wills. So they're a very flexible document. Guardianships. Even if you're not willing to do some of the other documents in New York State, you are allowed to sign a document that says, if a guardian is needed for me, here's who I want that person to be. And you can list them in order to help protect yourself of someone else, rather than just having the court trying to pick and appoint who they feel. You can nominate who you believe is going to be the best fit for your guardian. So having those legal documents in place is going to be a help as well. So adult protective services, this is probably, if you are worried that someone is subject to elder abuse or being abused, adult protective is a service that you can call. Generally, they're going to be looking for three things. So one, there's impairment, whether it's a physical or a mental impairment to the person who is being subject to the abuse. Is there some kind of imminent risk that they're worried there's going to be a loss in the near future, and no one else is able to step in or assist with them. So, and the thing about this, that if you report something to adult protective, the records are confidential and there's immunity from civil liability as long as the referral was made in good faith. So, and you'll see at the bottom of the slide, so for Steuben County's Adult Protective Services, their number is 607-664-2000. Just call them, tell them what you are looking for, and they will put you in touch with a caregiver or with a caseworker, excuse me. So in addition to adult protective, one thing that I always warn people is if we're worried about an imminent physical threat, you may not want to just call adult protective. You may actually want to call the county sheriff's department. So again, we've repeated the first phone number on this slide, Steuben County's Adult Protective Services. Steuben County Sheriff's Department, though, 607-622-3930. If we're worried that there is an imminent threat or something going on immediately, that's going to be the quickest way to get someone there. If we have someone in a nursing home, New York State has a nursing home complaint hotline. And then Steuben County has a long-term care ombudsman program where they can appoint, if we truly have no one who can step in to make medical decisions, the ombudsman program can have someone appointed as an advocate for someone if there's truly no one else, especially when it comes to like medical decisions. So this slide has a lot of important contact information that if you do need something, you can call these numbers and reach out depending on what is most appropriate for you. So with that, that's everything that I have today. Typically, we open things up to questions here since this is a recording. I have listed my contact information at the bottom of the slide. So if there's really something that you need, you can contact us. The other Steuben County Office of the Aging and Eric, who will come back on in a minute, can certainly give their contact information. They are a great organization. They have a wealth of knowledge. They have people there that are willing to help. They are another great resource for the county. So if you do have questions, or if you want copies of this material, you can get it through the Steuben County Office of the Aging as well. But thank you guys. I appreciate your time today.
Great. Thank you very much, Patrick. We really appreciate it. And as he mentioned, if you have any other questions or comments or would like the slides, or really just need any other information, please don't hesitate to call us or me directly at 607-664-2000. 2298. Again, we want to thank you for your time, for being here today, and thank you, Patrick. Hope everybody has a great rest of their day. Thank you.
Thank you.